Hey everyone, Clio here, and today I'm going to be talking about the 12 books for 2021. So every single year I make a book of 12 books that I want to get around to. At some point in time it was a longer list maybe, or a shorter one, I don't even remember at some point. But basically the goal is every single year I say, these are the books that I'm going to prioritize this year. Every single year, at the end of the year, it turns out that I read like half of them or something like that. But that's also just because, apart from making that list, I don't really have a system in place to prioritize them. I don't want to say like I need to read one of these every single month, because then it becomes too much of an obligation, becomes too much of a restriction. But so for this year I actually have a system in place. So this year, for every single book off of my TBR, my physical TBR that I read, I'm giving myself 1 credit as a sort of like way to budget myself in terms of buying new books. 1 credit will equal 3 euros. So I need to finish, like, in order for me to purchase a new release, I need to get to like 20 euros, for example. So I need to read like 6 books, for example, something like that. But with all of the books that I'm going to mention now as the 12 books for 2021, I'm giving myself 3 credits, meaning they are the equal of 9 euros, and that's almost like halfway to the value I need for a new purchase. So I'm hoping with that system in place that I can kind of motivate myself more to pick up books from this list. So without further ado, let's dive into this list. I will go through the books, what they are about, but I'll also kind of talk about some of the goals that these books might correspond to, because some of them do touch on certain goals that I've set myself. So the first one that I have on here is The Blade Itself by Jo Abercrombie. This is a fantasy book that I purchased a couple of years ago. I think I purchased it when the series was like relatively unpopular at the time. It was also super cheap at this sort of massive book fair, where usually like the super popular books wouldn't have come at the price that I got for this one. I paid like 2 euros for it or something, I think, at that point in time. But so this is a fantasy series. It's grimdark fantasy, and it's supposed to be very, very character driven. As far as I'm aware, based on what I've heard from people saying, there's barely any plots to the first one. I'm personally somebody who very much loves character-driven stories. I can more easily deal with absence of plots than I can deal with absence of character work or absence of like interesting character work. So I'm definitely looking forward to diving into this one. And this one fits in with my goal to read more fantasy as well. So in 2021 I want to be reading at least like half of my reading year, half of the books that I read in a year, I want to be fantasy reads. But so definitely in terms of that goal, it would also be perfect for me to get around to this one in 2021. Secondly, we have Augustus by John Williams. But so in this one we are following Augustus, who's the first Roman emperor, and so it's about his rise to that position after the brutal assassination of his uncle Julius Caesar. So that is actually not the reason why I have this book, though I will say that it does sound interesting. But the reason I have this book is because I absolutely love Stoner by John Williams, which is what this little sticker here refers to. So I read Stoner, it's not even a sticker, it's printed on it. So I read Stoner by John Williams years back, could it be as much as 10 years back at this point in time, and I absolutely fell in love with this. I read that for a book club with a couple of friends of mine, and it's like it's the most successful book that came out of that book club. Every one of us enjoyed it, everyone loved it, and like right after buying that, I bought 2 more John Williamses. I bought Augustus and I bought Butcher's Crossing. And so one of my kind of, not really a goal, but one of my intentions for 2021 is also to kind of dive more into these sort of like backlists of authors that I've previously enjoyed, to kind of figure out, are they favorite authors? Is it just that book, or is there really something to that author's writing style, to that author's work, that really suits my reading taste? Third up, Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes, which is a sci-fi novel that I've been meaning to get to. I've heard so many great things about it. I was so intrigued about diving into this one. I've forgotten most of it. I think it has to do with some sort of experiments about intelligence, and experiments including an experiment dealing with mice. And I think we're kind of looking at somebody who has like kind of a low IQ is often like the butt of the joke, and he somehow through these experiments becomes super intelligent perhaps. Not entirely sure of that premise, so it could be totally wrong. But in any case, I've heard wonderful things about this one, and I do want to dive more into sci-fi. It's one of my other intentions to dive more into genres that I don't typically read a lot. And I think I already wanted to do that in 2020, but in 2020 I really only read like one sci-fi or so. So this would be a good one to get around to finally, because it's been like relatively high on my radar at least for the past like year and a half since I bought this one, so I do want to get around to it now. Next we have The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde by Junot Diaz. This is a coming of age story. It is set in the Dominican Republic or maybe in the US, but with people of Dominican heritage. Don't know too much about it except that it's a coming of age story, but I actually gave this as a gift to a friend of mine and she absolutely loved it. She finished it like in no time and she was saying like how great of a book it was, and as a result I also purchased it for myself. So I do want to dive into this one and then discuss it with her, I guess, because she has a lot better of a memory than me, so she will remember what it's about, whereas if you ask me years after I've read something, then I don't remember anything about the book. Next up we have one that is actually scheduled, and that is The Ambassador's Mission by Trudi, Canavan, which is a sequel trilogy to the Black Magician trilogy, which was a trilogy in which we were following Sonia, who was this sort of girl living on the slums who turned out to have magical powers, even though in that realm it was believed that only people of the nobility have magical powers. But so this is a sequel trilogy. We will be following some of the original cast, and so I'm interested to see whether it's just going to rely heavily on that sort of nostalgia factor or whether there's some interesting new places that we're taking this to. I will be reading this one in February and continuing the series February, March, April, so this one is scheduled, it's happening. Another book that I'm dying to get to is Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel, Garcia, Marquez. I should actually be getting the illustrated edition for this as well in for Christmas, so hopefully that will happen. But so this is a love story set against the background of a cholera pandemic. So I'd actually put this on my TBR in April, I think, but then I just really didn't feel like reading it at that point in time. But I do want to read more Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I very much love his 100 Years of Solitude. I've read another book by him like Chronicle of an Announced Dead, I'm going to assume. Sometimes difficult for me to know the titles because, you know, I read them in Spanish, and so yeah, I'm not entirely sure that title, I just try to literally translate it. Next up we have a book that was actually kind of on like my maybe shelf for a long time. So like a year and a half ago or something, I went through my bookshelves and I wasn't sure about this book after all, because at some point in time I started it, but like really I only read like the first chapter or something, and that didn't immediately hook me. And so since then I've kind of been dreading it because it is a lot longer than I initially thought it was going to be. It's like just under 500 pages. However, I've seen some people talk about it in the meantime who absolutely love it and who have a similar opinion to me when it comes to Japanese literature, and that is I Am a Cat by Soseki Natsume. So this is a Japanese story translated into English, and it is all about a cat. It's going to be looking at humanity or the life of the owners of this cat through the eyes of cats. I've had good experiences with Japanese literature featuring cats. In 2020 I read The Traveling Cat Chronicles, which I absolutely love, and so I hope that this is going to be more of the same, and so I'm very eager to dive into it finally. And you know, most of my Japanese literature has been either super great or good. So I mean, I don't know why I'm so hesitant to dive into this one. Next up we have Howl's Moving Castle by Dianna Wynne Jones, which is something that's been on my shelf for way too long. I just really need to read it. I love the Studio Ghibli movie. I know this is going to be quite different, and I guess that is part of my hesitation, because Howl's Moving Castle, the Studio Ghibli film, is just it just gives me such a heartwarming feeling, because I just have so much nostalgia for that, for any Hayao Miyazaki movie. So it's just going to be like, I'm kind of hesitant just because of the fact that I know so many people say it's very different. On the other hand, I also know so many people who really love this one, so I should just dive into it. And so hopefully by putting it on here, I'm finally going to get around to prioritizing it, because I do also have the third book in this series on there. Weirdly enough, I don't have the second book, but so if I read this one, I can make my decisions about the third one or the rest of the series as well. Then we get to another one that's actually scheduled, and that will be The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. So this is also the first book in a fantasy series. I think it's going to be I don't know whether it's going to be 4 parts, but I think the 4th book is announced, but I don't know whether there might not be more in this series. So it's a fantasy series. It's going to be a heist plot, I think, and also a parody plot. It's got a great friendship at its center apparently, and so I just want to dive in now. It's often mentioned in people's top fantasy videos, and so I do want to also make up my mind about this one. And so I'm going to be starting this one in August. So in August is when I start the Gentleman Bastard series. I will be reading the first 3 books that are currently out. I don't think the 4th one is coming out in 2020. Might be mistaken about that. So I'll be reading those in August, September and October. Next we have The Thousand Autumns of Jacob de Zoet by David Mitchell. I've not read any David Mitchell. I've been kind of hesitant, I guess. I don't know why, but he's most famous for Cloud Atlas, and for some reason I find that book extremely daunting. I have this sort of idea in my mind that it's extremely weird and experimental, but I don't know where I get that idea from. I don't know whether that's accurate at all, because I know a whole lot of people who absolutely love Cloud Atlas. I haven't even watched the movie, read the book, but I have this whole preconception about it in my mind that makes it daunting, whereas it's based off of nothing. But so The Thousand Autumns of Jacob de Zoet is actually a book that I have on my shelves also for a very long time. And so it was with me at my previous apartment. I'm definitely sure of that. It's definitely like 5 years old on my shelf or something like that. And so I bought it for this beautiful cover. It's a story set in Japan in which we're looking at a Dutch clerk who goes there. I'm going to assume it's going to be talking a lot about imperialism, about the relationship between the West and the East, the way in which a Western view looks at Japanese culture and things like that. So I'm interested, I'm very much interested, but it needs to happen. I've had this book on these shelves for so long, I need to finally dive into it. Moving on to an author of which I'm also going to be making a new attempt, and that is Han Kang. This is Human Acts. So I read The Vegetarian by Han Kang. I actually bought the 2 books at the same time, and The Vegetarian is a book on which I cannot make up my mind. It was very weird, and I couldn't make up my mind at the end of it of, did I understand it? Did I like it? Did I not like it? So it left me very confused. It was very short, and I will probably reread it at some point, but that will depend on my experience with this one. If I love this one or like this one, I will probably reread The Vegetarian. If I don't, then I'll just say that probably my experience with The Vegetarian was just not agreeable, and that should be the conclusion of the fact that I couldn't wrap my head around my reading experience with that one. But so I think Human Acts is, as far as I'm aware, it seems a little bit more accessible. It is going to look at a very difficult subject matter because it's looking at a student uprising in South Korea. So Han Kang is a Korean author, and you know, The Vegetarian had a very weird subject to it, so I'm going to assume that it seems like this is a lot more mainstream, but we'll have to see as I go into it. And then the final book that is on here is actually a book that I've heard so many mixed things about that my initial excitement for reading this one has kind of waned, which is why I'm actually putting it on here. I'm giving myself extra credit for reading this one, and if I don't read it, if at the end of 2021 I won't have read it, there's a good chance that I'm going to unhaul it, and that is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. So this is a book about somebody who's kind of living a very scheduled, very organized life. She does the same thing all of the time. She very much follows these sort of like strict rules to her existence. And so while that's the way that she prefers to live her life, sometimes it feels like while her schedule includes everything, it might be missing some of the essentials. I think what I've heard about is that it's supposed to be autism representation, I think, and that people within the community don't necessarily like this representation. So as you can tell from what I've just said, I don't really know too much about the negatives surrounding this book, but I've picked up here and there that not everybody is happy with the way in which this book is handled. So I will definitely be looking more into that, and then possibly reading it, possibly not. But if I'm reading it, I'm definitely going to be looking at is there indeed autism representation, because maybe I'm just misinterpreting that, and if so, what are some of the own voices reviews for this one. But so yeah, that is my list of 12 books that I want to get around to in 2021. So all of these will earn me 3 credits. But so possibly I'm going to use this, for example, when there's a book that I absolutely want to get around to reading. I might read a couple of this list in order to make sure that I get around, that I can purchase the other one a little bit quicker. So I hope that this system is going to help me get around to these books more within this year, and maybe one day I'll have a completed 12 books list. Maybe one day at the end of the year I can say, hey, I read them all. But so yeah, wish me luck. Let me know if you've read any of those books and what your thoughts were on them, or you know, which ones you think I definitely need to prioritize off of this list, and we'll talk about them in the comments. But yeah, hope you enjoyed this video and see you guys for a future one. Bye!